Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we are diving straight into something absolutely fascinating today. We're going to unpack a deeply personal diary entry from an individual living with ASD and ADHD. What we're doing here is uncovering the intense internal realities of these conditions. We're going to look specifically at how hidden struggles shape everyday life and explore this profound and honestly sometimes really painful journey toward finding true psychological independence. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. Why would someone who speaks perfectly and logically feel entirely paralyzed in a normal conversation? Keep that paradox in mind because it's the exact puzzle we're going to explore over a 2-day journey of a very brave individual stepping out of total isolation. It's a story that reveals just how misleading the surface can actually be when we're talking about neurodiversity. So, our story kicks off with that terrifying first step, finding the sheer courage to reach out to a support group. Picture this situation. The author of our source text was unemployed, feeling completely stuck, and struggling to find the courage to just move forward. Looking for some kind of breakthrough, they decided to log into an online Zoom support group for neurodivergent individuals after years of total absence. And they wrote, "Hands shaking, cold sweat," logging on with a blurred background. Despite the modern comfort of safely blurring out your messy room on Zoom, the visceral physical anxiety of just taking that first step was completely overwhelming. And taking that step immediately brings us face to face with a massive psychological hurdle, the agony of masking. When it was finally time for the author to unmute their microphone and introduce themselves to the group, their neurodivergent traits, like an uncontrollable machine gun talk, immediately surfaced. This triggered an intense session of masking. Now, masking is this incredibly exhausting psychological process of hiding your true traits to appear perfectly neurotypical. For the author, this wasn't just about, being polite. Not at all. It was a literal survival tactic ingrained in them since childhood. They had become dangerously good at acting like a neurotypical person just to survive in society. But here is where it gets really wild, creating this harsh divide between the internal and external worlds. Internally, the author was in a state of absolute panic, totally losing their train of thought in a flurry of fast speech. But externally, the rest of the support group actually praised them for being remarkably eloquent and logical. It's the tragic paradox of masking, right? The outside world sees total competence, while your inside world is spiraling completely out of control. This leads to a deeply, deeply frustrating reality. The author said, "I'm so good at acting normal that when I say I have a developmental disability, people don't believe me." When they shared this exact thought in the Zoom room, the entire group validated the struggle. They all shared how their over-adaptation constantly causes their true, daily difficulties to be completely dismissed by society. It's a terrible catch-22. You try so hard to fit in that when you finally ask for help, no one believes you need it. This brings us to the second day of the meeting, where the conversation shifted to real, concrete workplace barriers. So on day 2, the author managed to hit the brakes a bit, controlled their speaking pace, and actively listened to the practical hurdles others faced every day. We're talking about things like answering phones while transferring calls, typing on a keyboard while listening to someone talk, or dealing with totally insensitive remarks from coworkers. The crucial takeaway here is that for a neurodivergent individual, fundamental neurological differences make what neurotypical people consider basic everyday multitasking duties incredibly difficult and honestly, sometimes totally paralyzing. But what really stood out was the author's reaction to hearing these stories. Because of their exceptionally high empathy, hearing about these workplace challenges wasn't just informative. It wasn't just data. It was like intense mental VR. They literally absorbed the stress and the harsh environment of those offices just by listening. That's how deeply their empathy runs. Now, navigating a world that feels that intense leads to our next major challenge. How on earth do you explain sensory overload to someone who doesn't experience it? During a really interesting discussion on self-advocacy, the author recounted a trip to Starbucks to illustrate what sensory overload actually feels like. Imagine sitting in a cafe. For them, their friend's voice across the table and the background noise of the cafe, the espresso machines, the background chatter, they both flooded the brain at the exact same volume. There's no background filter. It made a totally simple conversation incredibly hard to process, forcing them to constantly ask their friend to repeat themselves. So how do you explain a flooded brain to someone who has never felt it? When a highly social, neurotypical friend sort of joked about the author panicking and being flustered at the cafe, the author deployed this absolutely fascinating reframing technique to build a bridge of empathy.
They looked right at their friend and said, "This is a genius's problem." Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Tesla, and Einstein suffered from sensory overload too. I love this. By associating their sensory traits with historical innovators, they instantly validated their own struggle and totally destigmatized it for their friend, which fundamentally shifted the entire dynamic of that conversation.
Then, they drove the point home with a powerful comparison. To help their highly social friend understand the sheer exhaustion of just going outside and doing normal social interactions, they gave them an equivalent scenario. They said, imagine quitting your super social job to sit entirely alone, doing solitary manual labor for 8 hours a day for decades. That is the kind of mental toll we're talking about. The author used this precise analogy so the friend could finally grasp the sheer exhaustion of navigating a neurotypical world.
Naturally, the friend got a little defensive, right? Saying, well, I have a hard time too. But the author expertly navigated the emotional terrain here. Step 1, they acknowledged the friend's own hardships. Step 2, they praised the friend's ability to navigate society without getting depressed. And finally, step 3, they predicted their friend's future success. By stepping back and lifting the friend up, they maintain the relationship while still completely standing their ground. It's practically a masterclass in communication.
All of these interactions and realizations ultimately lead to the real turning point of this explainer, the first steps towards true independence. As we reach the conclusion of this 2-day support group journey, the author made a really profound realization about their future. Even though the group left them feeling wonderfully fulfilled and connected for the first time in ages, a harsh reality remained totally unresolved. Walking outside still made their body physically rigid, helplessly absorbing every passerby's thoughts and sensory data. No one else in the group shared that specific severe trait, so the journey wasn't just magically over. But if we zoom out and look at the timeline of this whole journey, it reveals something incredibly unexpected. This entire breakthrough was actually sparked by a deeply toxic situation. Just weeks prior, the author's mother had used these awful siege tactics, literally cutting off food and daily supplies to force them out of the house. Days later, a massive parent-child clash erupted. But incredibly, it was exactly that explosive fight that pushed the author to seek connection via Zoom, ultimately leading to the dawn of their psychological independence. Looking back at that catalyst, the author wrote something beautiful. The fight was a healthy sign of rebellion, a cry from the heart to leave home. Rather than just seeing their mother's cruel actions as a painful trauma to bury, they brilliantly reframed it. It became the exact spark required for their psychological development, the final push they desperately needed to reach out, to connect, and to begin truly understanding their own mind. Sometimes the harshest push really does lead to the most crucial first step. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this. What step will you take to understand the hidden struggles around you? Because once you understand things like masking and sensory overload, it completely changes how you see the people you meet. We never truly know what kind of intense mental reality someone else is navigating every single day. So keep seeking to understand, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.